Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I'm going to put some links to some related series in the description. I'll make a playlist out of these free videos. I was hoping to do it in maybe two pieces, but it's stretched over to the third, in regards to the seven liberal arts and how in places such as Chartres Cathedral, the connections to Masonic tradition and the craft guilds, because not just carpenters, stonemasons, alchemists, for instance, people who built this, the education system that they had, and very different philosophy to the method that we have now, and how all the buildings themselves are textbooks in stone, as we could say. And so left off with, for instance, the sacred blue, or the architecture, and these Hermetic links. Hermes, god of weights and measures, has been carried on especially through the caduceus, and the trivium and the quadrivium. Now the quadrivium, Hermes, gods of weights and measure, the quadrivium being essentially a study of what's measurable. But now the Mason tradition, so the stone masons, the skilled craft guild, not just stone workers but other craft guilds, how they are so vital in building these, how they are able to negotiate their conditions and exemption from certain church laws, for instance, and moving towards the end of a feudalist system. And there is a something to give a tip of a hat to in regards to that aspect. And if you look into the actual history of this, these movements and these groups, how they opposed the theocracy and brought in what we, the liberties we take for granted. Not in, you can say 100%, but there is a strong tradition of these groups. Now here's the 3-4-5 triangle, the Pythagorean theorem. You have to understand Pythagorean theorem for your geometry to make these types of things. And so we see this symbolism of the masons and of the cathedrals. And of course the stonework did not begin with the great cathedrals. It goes back way back in time. So mason's board, now you have your ruler, your compass and square. You have the tools of industry, the tools of working with stone, but tools of measurement as well. So the compass and the square, the level, which I just recently posted a video on in regards to the biblical ancient symbolism and Masonic. So you have a plumb line to create a level. But down here, so you have this 3, 5 and 7 steps. So if you look at this board here, we have 3 steps and then 5 steps and then 7. Now in earlier videos I've mentioned it, especially like we have the 5 steps which relate to the 5 senses. But you'll also see composite, Corinthian, Ionic, Doric and Tuscan. These are the 5 Roman orders of architecture. These steps are strength, wisdom and beauty. Now they would connect to Ionic, Doric and Corinthian, the 3 Greek orders of architecture. But then but finally we have the 7 steps, and well, it's the 7 liberal arts: astronomy, music, geometry, arithmetic, logic, rhetoric and grammar. So 3, 5 and 7 is to a Mason's lodge, but again, strength, wisdom and beauty, that would be Doric, Ionic and Corinthian. 3 Greek orders. So that's also the wisdom is the female, strength is the male and beauty is the virgin. Then we have the 5 Roman orders of architecture, which would connect to the 5 senses. But on top we have grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic. Geometry gets a special position, music and astronomy, the steps towards Masonic tradition. Here's another example of the music, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, logic, rhetoric, grammar, the 7 liberal arts, this older system of a more rounded education. So the craft guilds who built the great cathedrals, really carrying on a tradition of geometry, astronomy, all these sciences, which not just in the cathedrals, again, can be found in older times. Now I'm going to put the link into a series I did on Shesset, who was basically the superior of Thoth in regards to the ancient Egyptian sciences, and also to one on Heliopolis. So for instance, Strabo, as well as Herodotus, but Strabo travelled to Greco-Roman era writer, and he specifies at Heliopolis the houses of the priests and the schools of Plato and Eudoxus, the schools of geometry, Plato's famous for geometry, and Eudoxus, who was a famous astronomer, will point it out to us. For Eudoxus went up to that place with Plato, and they both passed 13 years with the priests. So again, the Greco-Roman writers tell us that also in Strabo's geography, but in other writers as well, that the Greeks and Romans learnt their sciences from the ancient Egyptians and Sumerians, Babylonians, Chaldeans as well. It is not something that's a secret. Where were we? Okay, so these Mason traditions. So the liberal arts, the quadrivium and the trivium, which we saw earlier episode, alchemical connection. Now also how this would apply. So where was the origin of the 7 liberal arts? Well, some would sort of strictly relate it, like in the pure form of the 7 liberal arts, to the medieval period, but they will extend that it goes back to Greco-Roman times, the origins of this particular system. This is from History of Mathematics, but you can pause to read these pages as well, speaking about which was higher, the geometry or the mathematics. This was in the Greek times and Roman times. This was debated. Some said arithmetic was the highest. Some would say geometry was the highest. But again, this would relate to Heliopolis. So there is a bit of a tendency in history to, anything before the Greeks and Romans that sort of doesn't get credited enough. Well, the Greeks and Romans did write it down very clearly, so we can be quite sure about what happened in those periods. But they also tell us that they learnt this from earlier civilizations, including the ancient Indians, but also, of course, ancient Egypt, especially at Heliopolis, and also in Sumer and Babylon, the Chaldeans as well. Where will we go? So I'll put the link to a series I did on Chesed. I'll put the link to a series I did on Heliopolis. I mentioned Sacred Blue, and so the Alchemy of, which is again the 7 steps of alchemy, the 7 metals, the 7 planets. I did a video a while back in regards to that, and how also in the 10 books of architecture by Vitruvius, he talks about these pigments, and so how did the ancient Egyptians make those wonderful colours? How did these other societies, the making of dyes and pigments was a alchemical skill going back quite some time. And okay, so that's about it for this series. I'll put this as a playlist. I'll put some links in the description to others. And what we find is that there is a strong ongoing tradition, again, in regards to weights and measure systems, at least to Greco-Roman. This cannot really be disputed, how I like the aspects of it, but those are recorded, tangible, measurable facts. But that these have their basis in earlier civilizations and the sophistication of ancient Egyptian, ancient Indian, Vedic, and Sumer and Babylon, because in old writings such as in the Epic of Gilgamesh, just like with the Bible, have so many layers of numerical geometric information written in there through sacred numbers, which are the same sacred numbers repeated in these cathedrals as well. So whether it's a Fibonacci sequence or the Pythagorean harmonic series as well, such as 432, 864, 1728, etc. Yes, the 7 liberal arts, especially via the quadrivium, music, arithmetic, geometry and astronomy, how they relate wonderfully to another. If you have a focus on geometry, you're going to have to learn about music. If you have a focus on music, you're going to have to learn about astronomy, as opposed to the system that we have now, which is very specialized, and never the twain shall meet, as they say. And we've separated things. We need to, because of the amount of specialization. But as a grounding, as an early introduction to education, I really think we need to re-examine the 7 liberal arts and look at these, because, again, I could just repeat from earlier series, but how with a few numbers and a few geometric proportions, you can really understand a lot about the solar system and the relationship of sun, earth and moon into distance and size and time, and how weights and measuring length, measuring weight, but also, for instance, measuring time, how they, with a few small numbers and proportions, So much knowledge is in there, and it's a different way of thinking, and I think a much superior way. So Chartres, Cologne, Clermont-Ferrand, these other cathedrals were universities and libraries, just like Heliopolis, or just like temple complexes such as Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, storehouses of knowledge. And so I hope you enjoyed this series. I've touched on it now. I've got okay, so John James would be a great, if you're really interested in especially medieval cathedral architecture. John James, he's an Australian architect and medieval historian specialising in, let's just call it, the sacred geometry in regards to cathedrals. He's a one person to investigate with some more information on that. Keith Critchlow is another. I'll try to remember to put those links in there. Keith Critchlow. And there's also a couple of episodes in the series Secrets in Plain Sight by Scott Onstott with a focus on Chartres Cathedral as well. Yeah, I'll overload the description box with a bunch of links to series and related videos, older ones and some couple of recent uploads as well. With that, I hope you've enjoyed this, got something out of it. Please like, share, comment to your heart's content. And with that, SGD signing out. Cheers. Have a good one.